G'day guys, this is Amiga. I'm just on a lunch break, so I'm just doing a quick live video. I went and saw Spider-Man the other day, and it was actually a pretty good movie if you cut out about 15 minutes of it, and that's when the entire movie was hijacked and turned into a political football. They were pushing the whole diversity thing, which is not unusual in Hollywood, but then they had a girl in the movie. They're at the Washington Monument, and she said, "I refuse to celebrate something that was built by slaves." Now, I'm an Aussie, and I'm not an American history expert, okay? Just getting that out of the way. Probably a lot of our American viewers know more about American history than I do. But what I do notice as a person who lives in Australia looking at America with all the identity politics is this whole narrative of slavery, which is brought up constantly and almost used as an excuse for bad behaviour by the African American community, or the idea is propagated that people in general owe them something, or the past hasn't been recompensed for adequately. There's a whole range of sort of grievances there, and I think some of those grievances are legitimate when they're made by legitimate people, but when they're used by people for personal gain or just to beat up other races and actually be racist themselves, I don't really think that is legitimate. I think it's pretty ironic, really. But what I wanted to tell you about is slavery is not unique to African Americans. Here in Australia, you'll probably know, if you're an American, you'll probably say, oh, that's where they sent all the convicts, and have a few jokes about it or whatever. I don't really care. But here in Australia, for about 80 years, the entire country was built on the back of slaves, and they were white slaves, Irish, English. Some people say they were brought here because they broke the law, but generally the poor people were gathered up from undesirable areas around England, immigrants who were all white and were shipped off to Australia against their will. Now, the women generally were raped throughout the ship journey to Australia and beaten, and when they got here, they were given out as slaves. And, if anyone wanted a wife or just somebody to sexually abuse, they were given out for that reason. So they would serve in houses, and they'd be mandatorily or just sexually abused all the time and expected to work in the house. And children obviously copped a lot of the same treatment. Young children, you can imagine like a 12, 13-year-old girl, some person would take that 13-year-old girl or 12-year-old girl, and she'd be raped, probably on the journey, and beaten, and then used as a slave once she got here to Australia. And there's even, I've been reading some historical accounts, and that was one ship of slave women came in and they dragged them out. Some of them were already pregnant from being raped, and others were dragged into tents where people were lining up to have sex with them, and after that they were sold into slavery. It was so brutal, the treatment of white slaves, that even the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people of Australia, traditional landowners, were shocked when I think it was one particular governor had a slave so severely flogged that his boots and shoes were filled with blood, and he had stolen something or was accused of stealing something from the Aboriginal people, so he was flogged, and the Aboriginals were so shocked by it. It was one of the most abhorrent things they'd ever seen. But if you actually look at all the other accounts, there is actually no difference at all of the accounts of the accounts that happened here in Australia, which also happened in America with the African American community, or the people that were brought in as slaves. Exactly the same kind of treatment: sexual abuse, forced labour, brutal floggings. If you tried to escape, you were shot. And even as a young kid, I grew up here in Australia watching shows about children and adults who were convicts who try to escape farms and areas, and they were hunted down and shot like animals. I'll just there's a whole range of stories. You can look it up for yourself. This one is called just look up Australian convicts history, and it'll give you a complete a set of websites with the stories from those particular days. But all the stories are of men trading convict women like cattle, who are all white and Irish and English. Young kids, like a 14, 15-year-old kid being hung for attempting to escape being a convict or being a slave. There are, any kind of mutiny was punishable by death. There are accounts here of women and children and men coming off ships who are slaves who look there was so much malnutrition they could barely walk, and they're all white slaves. There's stories here about the aftermath of floggings and people, white men who were so severely flogged and then told to go to work the next morning, and if they weren't able to carry out their work, sometimes they were repeatedly flogged. It just goes on and on and on. And I just wondered what people think about that, especially the African American community. If there's any African Americans, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. What do you think? 80 years has happened in Australia, and I don't know, it probably happened a bit longer in the US, but the treatment of white slaves in Australia was no different to the treatment of black slaves in America. Absolutely no difference. The parallels are quite staggering on the treatment. Yet, this is what I've noticed. And like I said, some people have legitimate grievances, but you don't see generations of white people whinging about it. You don't see generations of white people trying to use it as a form of gain. You don't see white people using it as a reason to behave badly. You don't see white people using it in any of those contexts at all. And why should a white family? And I've known quite a few Australians who've said, yeah, our ancestors or our great grandfathers were convicts, but they're not whinging about it. They're not using it. They're not using it for any kind of agenda. They're not using it for any kind of like I said, a platform for gain. Yet, other races think that they can use it as a platform for gain. So, just thought I'd point that out. A bit of Australian history for you. You can check it out online. It's interesting stuff. It's good to have a look at. I'm Omega. I'll be back soon with another video. I've been in contact with Imam Tawhidi pretty much on a daily basis. We're messaging each other. If you've got any, stories or anything you'd like to share with him, feel free to message me on my channel, and I can direct message Imam Tawhidi for you if you don't have direct contact with him. Obviously, there are security protocols in place because he's not loved by everyone. Some people actually want to see him dead, and we don't want to see that happen. So if you want to say something to Imam Tawhidi, let me know and I can direct message him. If you just want to attack him and carry on, I'm really not interested. I can't be bothered. Thank you very much for listening, guys. I'll get in on another lunch break. I'm trying to find time to make videos. It's so hard with my life. It's so busy. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll be back soon. Cheers.